Welcome to an epic journey of war, survival, and humanity's greatest battle in the stars. If you love cinematic military sci-fi, you're in the right place. I've put countless hours into crafting this immersive story. The battles, the sacrifices, the twists, and the legends that unfold. So if you enjoy this, please take a second to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe. It really helps this channel grow and keeps me motivated to create more for you. Now sit back, get ready for war, and let's dive into when no other species answered, humans came to our aid. We sent out the call, a desperate plea, not for warriors or saviors, but for anyone who would listen. We were dying, one by one, and in the vast silence of the stars, only one species answered, the humans. Harvona Prime, Kavash Homeworld Mission, Operation Iron Sky. Time to drop, T-minus 60 seconds. Captain Elias Kane sat rigid in the drop pod, his gloved fingers wrapped around the restraints as the countdown ticked down in his HUD. Outside the reinforced viewport, the black void of space shimmered with bursts of distant fire. A Xal-Korr planetary blockade, ugly, spindly warships bristling with spore cannons, had reduced most of Harvona Prime's orbital defenses to drifting debris. The Kavash, the elegant, peaceful species who had sent out the distress call, had no standing military. Their cities had burned for weeks. Their council begged for aid. Every species in the Galactic Council had ignored them. Humanity had not. The Wrath of Terra, a war-worn Titan-class dreadnought, had powered through the blockade like a battering ram. Now, Kane and his shock battalion were about to drop straight into hell. 10 seconds to deployment! The comms crackled as Lieutenant Sarah Vaughan's voice cut in. Calm, collected, ice-cold. Trajectory locked. Landing zone compromised. Xal-Korr forces detected in sector... The entire drop bay shuddered as a direct hit rocked the carrier. Kane's grip tightened. His men had already launched. Go! 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 The clamps released. He felt the gut-lurching drop of freefall as his pod ripped through space, fire blooming around the edges of the heat shield. Gravity seized him, the pressure crushing his chest, turning his breath into sharp, ragged gasps. Outside, a dozen pods burned. Xal-Korr flak guns spewing searing plasma bolts through the atmosphere. They're getting slaughtered on descent! Haynes's voice was raw over comms. A pod to their right took a direct hit. Kane barely had time to register the explosion before the shockwave spun them sideways. Red alarms blared. The display read, "Trajectory off course. Brace!" The pod slammed through a collapsing tower, metal screaming as it carved a fiery scar through the war-torn skyline. Then, impact. Kane's vision blacked out for half a second, the air driven from his lungs. Alarms, gunfire, screams. The drop pod door exploded outward. Ground Zero, Harvona Prime, Xal-Korr, kill zone. Kane ripped off his harness, drawing his carbine in one smooth motion. His squad's pods had landed in the ruins of a once beautiful plaza, now littered with the mutilated corpses of Kavash civilians. The Xal-Korr were already waiting. 8-foot-tall insectoid war beasts surged from the shadows, spiked limbs coated in fresh gore. They didn't use ranged weapons. They wanted to tear their prey apart up close. Haynes was the first to react. "Light 'em up!" Gunfire roared. Armor-piercing rounds punched through the first wave, rupturing chitinous exoskeletons, sending green-black ichor spraying. Kane fired in controlled bursts, each shot a precision kill. Vaughn, perched behind cover, deployed combat drones that launched searing plasma bolts into the advancing hordes. But there were too many. A Xal-Korr warrior rushed Kane. He barely dodged the scythe-like claws before plunging his combat knife into the creature's neck joint, twisting hard. It screamed, a deep, bone-rattling shriek, before collapsing. More came. The Kavash civilians watched in frozen terror. They had never seen battle, never killed. Kane shoved a rifle into the hands of one trembling Kavash male. "Fight, or die." His golden eyes flickered. Then he pulled the trigger. We had fought. We had won, or so we thought. The Xal-Korr didn't break. They didn't retreat, because they didn't need to. Over the radio, a chilling transmission from orbit. Command, this is the Wrath of Terra. We've lost the fleet. It was a trap. They knew we were coming. The signal cut to static. Kane looked up. The sky was burning. We came to fight, not to die. But war doesn't care what we want. Harvona Prime, Command makes a choice. The war was already lost. Kane had seen it before. Too many times. He had seen the signs in the Martian rebellions, in the doomed trenches of Titan's failed uprising. The war was lost before the first shot was fired, because the Xal-Korr didn't come here to conquer. They came to consume. He stood over the tactical holomap, watching human green markers flicker and vanish as the Xal-Korr advanced in wave after wave. Sir, we have to move. We're bleeding out squads every minute. Vaughn's voice was steady, analytical, but there was an edge to it now. Even she knew how bad this was getting. We hold this line, Kane said, or there's no war left to fight. The first counteroffensive. The humans had set their trap. The Xal-Korr advanced through the ruins, their chitin-plated war forms smashing through debris, clicking and screeching in their guttural tongue. Their beady black eyes scanned the wreckage. Their mistake. Boom! A skyscraper collapsed onto them, explosives rigged along its foundation. The air filled with fire and splintered metal as tons of rubble crushed the lead Xal-Korr vanguard. Kane pressed his comms. Engage! From the shadows, human railguns snapped to life. The first wave of Xal-Korr warriors never saw the attack coming. High-velocity kinetic rounds ripped through their ranks, punching holes in exoskeletal plating, severing limbs in an instant. Sergeant Haynes let out a feral grin, setting up his heavy rail cannon on a collapsed bridge. You bastards picked the wrong planet. He fired. The thunderous crack of the Gauss cannon echoed through the ruins, its payload smashing through 3 Xal-Korr in one shot. They're scattering, Vaughn's voice came through. We have them breaking formation. Kane nodded. This was how humans fought. We weren't stronger. We weren't faster. We were smarter. The cost of war. Then the Xal-Korr adapted. A terrifying screech split the air, a noise so deep, so unnatural, it vibrated through their bones. What the hell was that? Haynes growled. Then the earth trembled. From the ruined city blocks ahead, something moved. A kaiju-class war beast. It emerged from the collapsed infrastructure, chitinous, grotesque, 3 stories tall. And it wasn't alone. The Xal-Korr had bioengineered something new, a hybrid of their own war forms, spliced with harvested Kavash DNA. It was a walking abomination of stolen flesh and bone. Fall back, Kane roared. The kaiju beast charged, its massive spiked limbs smashed through buildings as human railguns pinged off its reinforced hide. Kane's squad barely made it out of the blast radius as the creature slammed into their last fallback position. We can't hold, Vaughn's voice was sharp now. Sir, we have to retreat. Kane looked back. The Kavash civilians were still inside the ruins. If they pulled back now, they were condemning them. But if they stayed, they all died. Akarne, we don't leave civilians. That was the rule. The one rule. And Kane was about to break it. Pull back, he ordered. Haynes looked at him. Vaughn hesitated. Sir, the civilians, Kane's jaw clenched. They're already dead. The moment haunted him. Even as they retreated into the tunnels, even as he heard the agonized, inhuman screams over the radio, Kane knew. This war wasn't about winning. It was about surviving. Final scene, cut off. They regrouped in the Undercity, barely escaping the kaiju's rampage. Kane's armor was splattered with Xal-Korr ichor. His hands were shaking. Vaughn leaned in, static crackling in her headset. Sir, we just lost contact with command. Kane's stomach turned. Haynes swore under his breath. They were the last ones left in orbit. For the first time since this war began, Kane felt it. The humans weren't just fighting a battle. They were losing the war. And they were alone. We had spent days running, hiding, bleeding, but that ends now. If we're going to die, we do it on our feet. Harvona Prime, the underground resistance. The tunnels smelled of rot. Kane hunched over a tactical holomap, watching as Xal-Korr movements flickered across the display. The situation was bleak. The Kavash survivors had nothing left. No weapons, no defenses, no reason to fight. And yet, they looked at Kane like he had an answer. "They're hunting us." Vaughn's voice was steady, but there was a razor-thin edge beneath it. "We have less than 48 hours before they've swept the entire Undercity." Sergeant Haynes cracked his knuckles, his voice a low growl. "So, we stop running. We hit them first." Silence. Kane looked up, his squad watching him. The Kavash Chancellor, Altenis, was still too afraid to speak, but one of his people, a young Kavash soldier, stepped forward. His bioluminescent skin pulsed a deep, determined blue. "We are ready. Whatever you need us to do." Kane exhaled. The Kavash were finally willing to fight. Time to teach them how. "We move fast, hit hard, get out before they even know what happened." They slid through the ruined cityscape, shadowing Xal-Korr patrols. Vaughn's AI fed updates into their HUDs, enemy formations, heat signatures, weakness points. Kane gave the order. "Execute." The first shots rang out. Vaughn's combat drones ripped into Xal-Korr flank patrols. Haynes's heavy railgun shredded a Xal-Korr war beast's skull in one shot. The Kavash fought back, for the first time. "We've got movement. Secondary squad engaging." A Xal-Korr elite unit rushed in, bladed limbs slashing, bioplasma searing through human armor. A Kavash soldier screamed, impaled through the chest. Kane fired 3 rounds point blank. The Xal-Korr died, snarling. "We're losing ground," Vaughn called out. "Detonate the charges, now!" Haynes grinned and pressed the trigger. A chain of explosions tore through the hive. Biovats ruptured, sending Xal-Korr warforms screaming into the fires. The entire sector burned. Kane's squad escaped into the ruins, leaving nothing but destruction behind. For the first time since the war began, humanity had struck back. We thought we had won. We were wrong. Hours later, the Xal-Korr counterattacked. They deployed something new. AI-driven hunter drones, adaptive chitin armor that could absorb human railgun fire, psychic warfare tactics, broadcasting hallucinations directly into enemy minds. Vaughn's hands clenched into fists. "They're learning." Haynes stared out at the wreckage. "So are we. We don't stop now. We keep pushing. We keep killing. Because the moment we stop, we lose everything." A full-scale battle erupted in the ruins. Humans and Kavash fought side by side. Xal-Korr warforms died in the streets. The Kavash were no longer running. They were fighting. And Kane knew. This was only the beginning. "Sir," Vaughn's voice came through the comms. "We just intercepted a transmission. The Xal-Korr Empire is mobilizing." Kane's stomach turned. The war wasn't ending. It was just beginning. War is about choices, and sometimes the only choice is who you let die first. Harvona Prime. The fall begins. It started with the sky. A deep, unnatural hum vibrated through the ruins of Harvona Prime. The air turned electric, the clouds swirling like a vortex of black fire. Then, the first strike hit. Orbital bombardment rained down. Plasma shells punched through entire city blocks. Shockwaves flattened entire districts, leaving nothing but fire and ruin. Kane watched from a shattered balcony, listening to the screams over the comms. "They're everywhere, we can't hold!" Signal lost. Another unit gone. "Sir," Vaughn's voice cut in. "Enemy swarm incoming. We need to move. Now." Kane didn't answer. He was too busy watching the end of the war. The Xal-Korr's new tactics, psychological warfare. The first wave hit the outer barricades. Xal-Korr hunting swarms moved with terrifying precision, Hive intelligence directing every unit. Humans fought back hard. Grenade turrets detonated kill zones. Autocannons shredded the first attackers. Railgun snipers picked off warform leaders. But it wasn't enough, because the Xal-Korr weren't just attacking physically. They're inside our minds. It started with whispers, then shadows moving in the corners of their vision, then soldiers turning on each other. Kane saw it firsthand, one of his own men screaming, clawing at his helmet, blood running from his eyes. "They're in my head. They're in my head." A gunshot. The soldier collapsed, dead by his own hand. Kane tightened his grip on his rifle. This wasn't just a battle. This was annihilation. A major death. The cost of war. "We need to fall back." Vaughn's voice was sharp now, urgent. Kane gritted his teeth. "We fall back. We lose the city. We stay. We lose everyone." Then the order came through the comms. A unit cut off. No escape. Haynes looked at Kane. "We can't leave them." Kane's response was cold, final. "We already did." A long silence. Then Haynes punched him, hard. "We don't abandon our own, Kane. We do when it means saving the rest." But it was already too late. The cut-off unit's final transmission played in their ears. "Sir, tell my family I didn't run." Then the Xal-Korr hit them. Then nothing. Another unit gone. More ghosts to carry. The final stand. Harvona Prime falls. The last defensive line collapsed. The Kavash refugees tried to flee, but there was nowhere left to run. Human command posts burned, radio signals fading into silence, and Kane knew. The battle was lost. He turned to Vaughn. "Prepare for extraction. We need to get off this rock." "Sir, there's nowhere left to go. This war isn't about saving anyone anymore. It's about how we die." "Incoming transmission," Vaughn whispered. "It's not human." A deep, hollow voice echoed through their comms. "Surrender. Die quickly, or resist, and we devour your worlds one by one." Kane didn't respond. Instead, he reloaded his weapon. Because if this was humanity's last stand, then he would make damn sure the Xal-Korr bled for it. "We were never meant to survive this war, but we found something. And now, they're the ones who should be afraid." The tunnels beneath the Kavash capital city stretched deep beneath the planet's crust, a forgotten place, untouched by war. "How much time do we have?" Kane asked, his voice hoarse. Vaughn checked her wrist display. "Less than 6 hours before they break through." 6 hours. That was all that remained before the last human and Kavash defenders were wiped out, and they still hadn't found it. Vaughn's holographic interface flickered, scanning the ancient Kavash database. Then, she found it. "Oh, my God." Haynes turned to her. "What?" Vaughn's face was pale. "The Kavash knew about the Xal-Korr before this war, before any of it. They created them." Silence. Kane stepped forward, eyes locked on the screen. "Explain, now." Vaughn exhaled. "The Xal-Korr weren't conquerors. They were slaves, engineered by the Kavash thousands of years ago, to be perfect soldiers. But something went wrong. They rebelled, and the Kavash tried to erase them. They failed." Kane clenched his jaw. If the Kavash built them, then they built something to stop them. Vaughn nodded, pulling up an ancient file. "There's a failsafe, a last resort weapon deep below the city." A map flashed across the screen, leading to a hidden structure buried beneath them. "It's still active." Kane didn't hesitate. "We're going down there, now." The desperate final mission. A small team, Kane, Vaughn, Haynes, and a handful of Kavash warriors, descended into the darkness. They were outnumbered, low on ammo, and had one chance to activate the failsafe before the Xal-Korr breached the city. Every step deeper revealed ancient Kavash machinery, long dormant, covered in dust, humming with lost power. Then, they found it. A colossal machine. "What is it?" Haynes whispered. Vaughn's fingers danced across the console. "A neural disruptor. The Kavash designed it to override Xal-Korr hive commands. If we activate this, we can turn them against each other. Above them, the battle was already breaking apart. The last human defenses collapsed. The Xal-Korr breached the city walls. Kane's men were dying, one by one. Vaughn worked furiously at the ancient console. We need more time. They didn't have more time. Haynes grabbed his rifle. Then buy some. He and the remaining soldiers held the corridor, fighting until their last bullets, last breath. Then, it happened. The disruptor activated. A pulse surged through the air. Xal-Korr warriors froze mid-charge. Then, they turned on each other. Kane stood over the battlefield, watching the impossible. For the first time in history, the Xal-Korr were afraid, because humanity didn't just fight back, they stole the enemy's army. This is it. No second chances, no retreat. We win, or we die. Harvona Prime. The final battle begins. The sky was fire. Above them, Xal-Korr warships burned, black organic behemoths, their hulls shattered by kinetic barrages from the last remnants of the human fleet. Below, the planet's surface was a war zone of blood and ruin. Cities crumbled under siege. Explosions rippled across the skyline. The last Kavash warriors, once a peaceful people, charged into battle beside human infantry. And in the center of it all, Kane stood. This is Captain Kane to all surviving units. Hold your ground. The Xal-Korr are breaking. We push now, or we lose everything. He looked to Vaughn. Is it ready? Vaughn's fingers danced across the neural disruptor's interface. The ancient Kavash machine was primed. We have one shot at this. Then let's end this war. The Battle of Harvona Prime. The Xal-Korr unleashed everything. Massive biotitans, walking war forms 3 stories tall, charged through the battlefield. Psychic attacks shattered human and Kavash minds alike, but humanity had adapted. Railgun artillery ripped through the enemy's armored war beasts. Kavash aerial strikers unleashed plasma storms across the battlefield. Drones swarmed like locusts, cutting through Xal-Korr flesh. For the first time in history, the Xal-Korr were on the defensive. But it wasn't enough, because the enemy still had their queen. Sir, Vaughn's voice was quiet. Something's coming. And then Kane heard it. A sound that sent terror through every living thing. A scream. Not from the battlefield. Not from a ship. But from every Xal-Korr at once. And then she arrived. A massive towering horror, the Xal-Korr queen, the source of their hive mind, descending from the sky. She's overriding the disruptor, Vaughn shouted. Kane gritted his teeth. Then we take her out the old-fashioned way. The suicide mission. Killing a god. Kane, Haynes, and a strike team fought their way to the Queen's location. Every step was hell. Entire buildings collapsed as the Xal-Korr's last defense swarmed them. Haynes was wounded but refused to fall back. Then they reached her. How the hell do we kill that? The Queen turned, her form shifting, a nightmare of 1,000 writhing limbs. She spoke into Kane's mind. You have already lost. Number not today. Vaughn, from orbit, the last human battleship fired. A direct hit, the Queen screamed. The Xal-Korr forces collapsed. Without their queen, the hive was breaking. But it wasn't enough. She's still alive. Haynes looked at Kane. You get out of here. That's an order. Kane knew what he was about to do. Haynes, don't... But it was already done. Haynes charged the Queen, a detonator in his hand, for Earth. The explosion swallowed them both. The Queen was dead. The Xal-Korr mind was broken. Sir, it's over, Vaughn whispered, but Kane didn't answer. Because he knew the truth. The war wasn't over. It had just changed. Victory isn't a moment. It's the long silence after the last shot is fired. Harvona Prime, 1 month after the war. The world was quiet. Kane walked through the shattered remnants of Harvona Prime, his boots crunching over broken glass and scorched debris. Once, this had been a city of towering silver spires, bathed in the soft glow of Kavash bioluminescence. Now, it was a graveyard. The last battle had burned the sky. "You should be in orbit." Vaughn's voice broke the silence. He turned. She was standing near the remains of a collapsed building, her armor scratched, her face lined with exhaustion. "I needed to see it," Kane muttered. "See what? What we won, and what we lost." The Kavash held their first war memorial in recorded history. "We were not warriors," Chancellor Altenis said to the gathered survivors, "but we were forged into one." His species had changed. The Kavash, once pacifists, had taken up arms, and they would never put them down again. For centuries, humanity had been ignored by the greater galactic powers, but now, the Galactic Council could not ignore the species that stood against the Xal-Korr. "Humanity is no longer an outsider," Vaughn said. "We just changed the balance of the galaxy." Vaughn's terminal flashed red. "We just intercepted a transmission." Kane frowned. "From who?" She turned the display towards him. A signal, faint, barely readable, coming from deep space. "Survivors," she whispered. "Not ours. Theirs." The Xal-Korr weren't gone. They were waiting, and they weren't alone. Kane exhaled. The war was over, but something else was coming. "Tell Command," he said. "We're not done yet." And that's it. Humanity's fight for survival in the heart of a war-torn galaxy. But this is just the beginning. I'm doing everything I can to bring you the best sci-fi storytelling possible. If you enjoyed this, show your support by hitting like, leaving a comment, and subscribing. Your support keeps me going, fuels my creativity, and helps grow this channel into a true sci-fi powerhouse. Want to see the next chapter? Want a full series? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe now, because the war isn't over yet.